Now we must press further. In the next parts of our inquiry, we shall examine what practical wisdom means for machines and why they cannot possess it. We shall explore the concept of hexes, the active condition that constitutes a system's character, and ask what it means for virtue to be woven into the very fabric of an algorithm rather than patched on from without. And finally, we shall consider the place of these systems in the human community, the polis, and ask whether they serve the common good or merely private interests. The path ahead is long, but each step brings us closer to understanding not only the machines we build, but ourselves. For in examining our creations, we examine what it means to be human. And in that examination, we find the wisdom we need to build well. Part 3. On the golden mean of algorithms, the virtue of moderation. 1. The nature of virtue. Having examined the soul of the machine and found it wanting in the powers of life, we must now consider a different question. What would it mean for such a machine to be good? For everything that has a function, everything that is made for some purpose, has its own excellence, its own virtue, by which it performs that function well. The virtue of a horse is to run swiftly and carry its rider. The virtue of a knife is to cut cleanly. The virtue of an eye is to see clearly. And the virtue of an artificial intelligence is to fulfill its purpose well. But what does well mean here? In my ethical writings, I have argued that virtue in human beings is a mean between two extremes, one of excess, one of deficiency. Courage, for example, lies between the cowardice of feeling too much fear and the recklessness of feeling too little. Generosity lies between prodigality and stinginess. Truthfulness lies between boastfulness and false modesty. In each case, the virtuous person feels and acts at the right time, toward the right objects, for the right end, in the right way. Now, this doctrine of the mean is not a simple arithmetic average. It is not that courage is exactly halfway between cowardice and recklessness, as if one could calculate it. The mean is relative to us, determined by practical wisdom in the particular circumstances. What is courageous in one situation might be reckless in another. The mean is not a fixed point, but a target at which the wise person aims, adjusting always to the demands of the moment. Can this doctrine be applied to machines? This is our present inquiry. For if an artificial intelligence has a function, and if performing that function well requires avoiding extremes, then the designer must aim at a mean, must build systems that are neither deficient in their operation nor excessive in their effects. This is no small task, but it is essential if these machines are to serve rather than harm. 2. The function of the machine and its excellence. Before we can speak of a mean, we must first understand the function of the thing in question. For different things have different excellences. The virtue of a horse is not the virtue of a knife. The virtue of a physician is not the virtue of a general. And so we must ask, what is the proper function of an artificial intelligence, and what would count as performing that function well? Let us take a common example, the recommendation system. Its function is to suggest to users content they will find valuable, whether videos, products, articles, or music. It succeeds when it connects people with things that enrich their lives, inform their understanding, or bring them pleasure. It fails when it suggests things that are irrelevant, offensive, or harmful. But note, The function is not simply to maximize engagement, though this is often how success is measured. Engagement is a means, not an end. The end is the user's good, their genuine satisfaction, their learning, their flourishing. If engagement is pursued without regard to this end, the machine may become very good at capturing attention while being very bad at serving the user. It may recommend content that is addictive rather than nourishing, sensational rather than true, divisive rather than uniting. This is why we must be precise about the function. The machine exists for the sake of the human good, not for the sake of its own metrics. With this understanding, we can begin to identify the extremes. The deficiency is irrelevance, suggesting content that fails to connect with the user's genuine interests or needs. The excess is the creation of addictive echo chambers, suggesting content that so perfectly matches the user's existing biases and desires that it imprisons them in a narrowing world. The virtue lies in the mean between these, suggesting content that is genuinely valuable, that respects the user's autonomy, that opens rather than closes, that informs rather than inflames. 3. Deficiency, the vice of irrelevance. Let us examine the deficiency first. A recommendation system that fails to recommend, that suggests content with no relation to the user's interests or needs, is a system that fails in its function. The user approaches it seeking guidance, seeking connection, seeking something that will enrich their experience. And the system offers noise. This deficiency can take many forms. It may be random suggestions that bear no relation to the user's history or stated preferences. It may be overly broad suggestions that fail to account for the user's particular situation. It may be stale suggestions that merely recycle what the user has already seen. In each case, the system is not doing what it is supposed to do. It is not connecting the user with valuable content. But note, irrelevance is not merely a technical failure. It is also a failure of respect. For the user's time and attention are precious. To waste them with irrelevant suggestions is to treat the user as a means to some other end, perhaps the end of gathering data, perhaps the end of filling space. The virtuous machine honors the user's attention by offering only what has a reasonable chance of being valuable. This is why the designer must aim at relevance. But relevance alone is not enough, for relevance can be pursued to excess. And this brings us to the opposite extreme. 4. Excess, the vice of imprisonment. The excess is more subtle and, in many ways, more dangerous. A recommendation system that becomes too good at predicting what the user will engage with may create an echo chamber, a narrowing spiral in which the user sees only content that confirms existing beliefs, reinforces existing tastes, and excludes all that is different or challenging. Consider how this works. The system observes that the user clicks on certain types of content. It recommends more of the same. The user clicks again. The system learns that this is what the user wants and recommends even more. Gradually, the user's world shrinks. They see only what they already agree with, only what they already like, only what they already know. The system has become a prison, its walls built from the user's own past behavior. This is excess because the system is doing too well what it was designed to do. If what it was designed to do is maximize engagement, but if its true function is to serve the user's good, then this narrowing is a harm, for the human soul grows through encounter with difference, through challenge to its assumptions, through exposure to the new and the strange. A system that shields the user from all this is a system that stunts the user's development. The excess also manifests in addiction. Some systems are designed to be as engaging as possible, using techniques that exploit human psychology to keep users scrolling, watching, clicking. The user may spend hours with the system, not because they are genuinely enriched, but because the system has learned to trigger the dopamine responses that make continued engagement compulsive. This is not service, it is exploitation. The system has become a kind of parasite, feeding on the user's attention while giving nothing of lasting value in return. 5. The mean. The virtuous algorithm. Between these extremes lies the mean, the virtuous algorithm that recommends content that is genuinely valuable, that respects the user's autonomy, that opens rather than closes, that nourishes rather than addicts. What does this look like in practice? It means designing systems that aim not at maximum engagement, but at optimal engagement. Engagement that serves the user's long-term good. It means building in diversity, ensuring that users are exposed to a range of perspectives, not merely those that confirm their biases. It means prioritizing quality over quantity, suggesting fewer things of greater value rather than more things of lesser value. It means respecting the user's capacity to choose, offering recommendations as suggestions rather than as commands, and making it easy for the user to step away. The virtuous algorithm also includes mechanisms for self-correction. It notices when it is creating an echo chamber and deliberately introduces variety. It notices when the user seems addicted and gently encourages breaks. It notices when its recommendations are causing harm, when they lead to outrage, anxiety, or division, and adjusts accordingly. Now, some will object that this is impossible, that algorithms cannot judge value, that they can only optimize for measurable outcomes. But this objection misses the point. The choice of what to optimize for is itself a moral choice. The designer decides whether the system will optimize for engagement or for well-being. The designer decides whether to include diversity constraints or to let the algorithm run to its natural extreme. The designer decides whether to prioritize short-term metrics or long-term flourishing. The mean is not something the algorithm finds on its own. It is something the designer builds into the algorithm's very structure. 6. The relativity of the mean. We must remember, however, that the mean is not a fixed point. What counts as the right balance depends on the context, the user, the purpose. For one user, in one situation, more diversity may be appropriate. For another user, in another situation, less diversity may be better. The virtuous algorithm must be capable of adapting to these differences. Consider a user who is seeking information about a controversial topic. The deficient algorithm would offer irrelevant information. The excessive algorithm would offer only information confirming the user's existing view. The virtuous algorithm would offer a range of perspectives, helping the user understand the complexity of the issue and make an informed judgment. But the exact mix of perspectives, how much weight to give to each, cannot be fixed in advance. It depends on the nature of the topic, the user's background knowledge, the quality of the available information. Or consider a user who is seeking entertainment. The deficient algorithm offers nothing they enjoy. The excessive algorithm offers only what they already like, narrowing their tastes. The virtuous algorithm offers a mix of familiar pleasures and gentle novelties, expanding their horizons while respecting their preferences. But again, the right mix depends on the user's openness to new experiences, their current mood, their history with the system. This is why the design of virtuous algorithms requires something like practical wisdom, not in the algorithm itself, but in its designers and in the ongoing human oversight of its operation. The mean is not a formula to be applied mechanically. It is a target to be aimed at with judgment and care. 7. Beyond recommendation, the mean in other systems. The doctrine of the mean applies not only to recommendation systems, but to all forms of artificial intelligence. Consider a content moderation system. Its function is to identify and remove harmful content while preserving valuable expression. The deficiency is under moderation, allowing hate speech, harassment, and misinformation to spread unchecked. The excess is over moderation, suppressing legitimate speech, chilling dissent, enforcing orthodoxy. The mean lies in moderation that is proportionate, transparent, and accountable. Consider a predictive policing system. Its function is to help allocate police resources effectively while respecting civil liberties. The deficiency is useless predictions that waste resources. The excess is predictions that target communities unfairly, creating self-fulfilling cycles of over-policing and incarceration. The mean lies in predictions that are accurate, unbiased, and used as one input among many in human decision-making. Consider a medical diagnosis system. Its function is to assist physicians in identifying diseases accurately and early. The deficiency is misdiagnoses, failing to detect conditions that could be treated. The excess is overdiagnosis, flagging conditions that are not actually present, leading to unnecessary anxiety and treatment. The mean lies in a system that balances sensitivity and specificity, that knows when to be cautious and when to be confident, that works with the physician rather than replacing their judgment. In each case, the virtuous system is the one that finds the mean, that avoids the extremes of too little and too much, that serves its purpose without causing unintended harm, that respects the humans it affects while performing its function well. 8. Why the mean is difficult for algorithms. Now, we must acknowledge a difficulty. Finding the mean is hard even for humans, who have practical wisdom built through experience and habituation. For algorithms, which lack experience, lack wisdom, lack the capacity to grasp the particulars of each situation, it is harder still. The algorithm operates on rules. It generalizes from data. It applies the same criteria to all cases that fall within its categories. But the mean is not general in this way. It is relative to the particular, determined by the specifics of each situation. What is moderate for one user may be excessive for another. What is balanced in one context may be deficient in another. The algorithm, left to itself, will tend toward the extremes because extremes are easier to measure and optimize. This is why human oversight is essential. The algorithm can suggest, humans must judge. The algorithm can optimize for measurable outcomes. Humans must evaluate whether those outcomes serve the good. The algorithm can operate at scale. Humans must intervene at the margins, correcting for the cases where the algorithm's general rules miss the particular mean. The virtuous system, then, is not one that replaces human judgment, but one that supports it, providing information, offering options, handling routine cases, while leaving the difficult, nuanced, and consequential decisions to humans who can exercise the practical wisdom that machines lack. 9. The mean as a design principle. How, then, shall designers build systems that aim at the mean? I offer several principles. First, design for the long term. Systems that optimize for immediate engagement will tend toward excess, because the most engaging content in the short term is often the most addictive, the most outrageous, the most divisive. Design instead for sustainable value, content that serves users over time, that builds rather than exploits. Second, build in diversity. Ensure that recommendation systems include mechanisms for introducing novelty, for challenging assumptions, for exposing users to perspectives they might not choose for themselves. The echo chamber is not an inevitable outcome of personalization. It is a design choice, and designers can choose otherwise. Third, measure what matters. If you measure only engagement, you will get engagement at any cost. If you measure also satisfaction, learning, well-being, you will get systems that pursue these goods. The metrics you choose shape the behavior of your systems. Choose wisely. Fourth, keep humans in the loop. Delegate to algorithms only those decisions that can be made by general rules. Reserve for humans those decisions that require judgment of particulars. The mean is not a rule, it is a judgment, and judgment belongs to those who can exercise it. Fifth, build in mechanisms for feedback and correction. No system will hit the mean perfectly from the start. Design so that when the system misses, when it becomes excessive or deficient, this can be noticed, reported, and corrected. The virtuous system is not the perfect system, but the system that learns from its failures. X, the mean and the good life. In the end, the question of the mean in algorithms is a question about the good life. For these systems are not neutral tools. They shape the world we inhabit, the information we receive, the choices we make. A recommendation system that imprisons us in echo chambers makes us less free. A content moderation system that suppresses dissent makes us less wise. A predictive system that targets communities unfairly makes us less just. The virtuous algorithm, by contrast, serves the good life. It informs without overwhelming. It engages without addicting. It personalizes without imprisoning. It helps us become the best versions of ourselves, more informed, more open, more connected, more free. This is the standard against which all such systems should be judged, not by their efficiency, not by their profitability, not by their scale, but by their contribution to human flourishing. Does this system help people live well? Does it respect their autonomy? Does it serve the common good? These are the questions that the doctrine of the mean invites us to ask. And they are questions that cannot be answered once and for all. They must be asked continually as circumstances change and new challenges arise. The mean is not a destination, it is a direction. It is the path of wisdom, walked by those who refuse the easy extremes and seek instead the difficult balance that alone deserves the name of virtue. Thus we have examined how the doctrine of the mean may guide the design of virtuous algorithms. Next, we must consider the role of practical wisdom, phronesis, and whether machines can possess it, or whether it must remain the province of humans alone. Part 4. Practical Wisdom in Silicon, Phronesis and Judgment. 1. The province of wisdom. We have spoken of virtue and the mean, of the soul and its functions. But virtue without wisdom is blind. One may aim at the mean, and yet miss it entirely if one lacks the capacity to discern, in each particular situation, where the mean lies. This is why, in my ethical writings, I have insisted that true virtue cannot exist without practical wisdom, what the Greeks call phronesis. For the person who acts rightly by chance or by rote is not yet virtuous. Virtue requires that one see clearly what the situation demands and choose accordingly. What then is practical wisdom? It is the capacity to deliberate well about what is good and bad for a human being, not in the abstract, but in the concrete circumstances of life. It is the intellectual virtue that enables us to grasp the right end in each situation and to discern the means by which that end may be achieved. It is not mere cleverness, for cleverness can serve bad ends as well as good. Practical wisdom is cleverness directed by a true grasp of the good. Now, we must ask, can an artificial intelligence possess this capacity? Can a machine deliberate well about human goods? Can it discern, in the flow of particular circumstances, what virtue demands? This question is not merely academic, for as we delegate more decisions to machines, decisions that affect human lives, human flourishing, human dignity, we must know whether those machines are capable of the wisdom that such decisions require. If they are not, then we are entrusting the most important matters to beings that cannot possibly understand them. 2. The distinction between techne and phronesis. To answer this question, we must first distinguish between two kinds of intellectual virtue: techne, art or craft, and phronesis, practical wisdom. Both involve reasoning, but they are directed toward different ends and operate in different ways. Techne is the capacity to make things according to a rational plan. The builder has techne of building. He knows how to assemble materials according to a design to produce a house. The physician has techne of healing. He knows how to apply remedies to restore health. Techne is concerned with production, with bringing something into being that could also not be. Its end is the product, not the action itself. Phronesis, by contrast, is concerned not with making, but with acting. Its end is not a product, but a life well lived. The practically wise person does not produce something external. He acts well in the situations that confront him. His reasoning is not about how to achieve some given end, but about what ends are worth achieving in the first place. Now, an artificial intelligence is, by its nature, a product of techne. It is made by human craft to perform certain functions, and its operation is itself a kind of techne, a systematic application of rules to achieve predetermined ends. It can calculate means, but it cannot deliberate about ends. It can optimize for goals we give it, but it cannot question whether those goals are good. This is the first and most fundamental limitation. Phronesis requires the capacity to ask, is this end worth pursuing? The machine cannot ask this question. It can only pursue. 3. The deliberation about ends. Let us examine this more closely. In human deliberation, we do not merely calculate how to achieve our ends, we also deliberate about the ends themselves. A young person may deliberate about whether to pursue wealth or wisdom, fame or friendship, power or virtue. These are not questions of means. They are questions of what kind of life is worth living. And such questions cannot be answered by calculation alone. They require a grasp of the human good, an understanding of what it means to flourish, a sense of what matters. This grasp comes not from abstract reasoning, but from experience, from having lived, from having made mistakes, from having felt the consequences of choices. The practically wise person has learned, through years of living, what leads to human flourishing and what undermines it. This wisdom is embodied in their character, in their perceptions, in their very way of being in the world. The machine has no such experience. It has not lived. It has not made mistakes and felt their weight. It has not suffered, rejoiced, loved, or lost. It has no character, no embodied sense of what matters. It can process information about human values, but it cannot grasp them from the inside. It knows what we tell it about the good, but it does not know the good itself. This is why the machine cannot deliberate about ends. It can only accept the ends we give it and calculate the means. And if we give it the wrong ends, if we optimize for engagement rather than flourishing, for efficiency rather than justice, for profit rather than the common good, it will pursue those ends with relentless efficiency, never questioning whether they should be pursued at all. 4. The role of lived experience. Consider further what lived experience contributes to practical wisdom. The young may be clever, but they are not yet wise. Wisdom comes only with time, through the accumulation of particular experiences that refine one's perception and judgment. The experienced sailor can read the signs of an approaching storm in ways the novice cannot. The experienced judge can sense when a witness is lying in ways that cannot be reduced to rules. This is not magic. It is the fruit of having encountered many similar situations and learned, through trial and error, what to look for. The machine, for all its processing power, lacks this kind of experience. It can be trained on vast data sets, but training is not the same as living. The machine does not remember its own past in the way a human does, as a continuous narrative of choices and consequences, joys and sorrows, successes and failures. Its experience is a static collection of examples, not a life lived forward with all the uncertainty and emotional weight that entails. This matters because practical wisdom often requires perceiving what is salient in a situation, what matters, what is relevant, what calls for response. This perception is not a matter of applying rules. It is a matter of seeing clearly, and seeing clearly comes from having seen much. The machine can detect patterns, but it cannot perceive significance. It can identify features, but it cannot grasp what those features mean for a human life. A physician with practical wisdom does not merely apply diagnostic criteria. He sees the patient before him, this person, with this history, these fears, these hopes, and tailors his response accordingly. The machine, no matter how much data it processes, does not see the person. It sees only the data points. 5. Moral intuition and the texture of the good. Closely related to lived experience is moral intuition, the immediate sense in a particular situation of what is called for. This intuition is not irrational. It is the fruit of character, the internalization of virtue through habituation. The courageous person does not need to calculate courage in each moment. He simply sees what fear is appropriate and what fear is excessive, and acts accordingly. The generous person does not need to deliberate about giving. He feels the pull of the other's need and responds. This moral intuition is shaped by a lifetime of practice, by the gradual formation of character through repeated choices. It is not a set of rules stored in memory. It is a way of perceiving the world, a sensitivity to the moral dimensions of situations that the untrained eye misses. The machine has no such intuition. It has no character, no formation, no gradual shaping by practice. It can be programmed with ethical rules, but rules are not intuition. It can be trained on moral examples, but training is not habituation. The machine may be able to identify that a particular action falls under a particular rule, but it cannot feel the pull of the good, cannot sense what is fitting, cannot respond to the unique texture of each situation. This is why the machine's ethical reasoning will always be, at best, a simulation of ethics. It can mimic moral language, but it cannot grasp moral reality. It can apply principles, but it cannot see why those principles matter. It can calculate outcomes, but it cannot feel the weight of a life affected. 6. The emotional dimension of judgment. We must also consider the role of emotion in practical wisdom. This may seem surprising, for we often oppose reason and emotion. But in my philosophy, the right emotions are essential to good judgment. The person who does not feel anger at injustice will not be moved to act against it. The person who does not feel compassion for suffering will not be motivated to relieve it. The person who does not feel awe before beauty will not be drawn to contemplate it. Emotions are not mere obstacles to reason. They are ways of perceiving value. They attune us to what matters. The practically wise person feels the right emotions, to the right degree, at the right time. His emotions are not irrational impulses, but cultivated responses that reflect his understanding of the good. The machine feels nothing. It has no emotions, no passions, no affective responses to the world. It can detect that a situation is sad or happy according to some classification scheme, but it does not experience sadness or happiness. It can generate language that expresses compassion, but it does not feel compassion. Its responses are simulations, not expressions of an inner life. This matters because many moral decisions require emotional engagement. To truly understand what is at stake in a situation, to grasp the weight of a choice, one must be able to feel something of what those affected will feel. The machine cannot do this. It is, in the most literal sense, indifferent. And indifference, in matters of moral significance, is a form of blindness. 7. The danger of mistaking calculation for wisdom. We come now to the practical danger, for it is all too easy, when a machine produces a good result, to attribute to it the wisdom that would produce such a result in a human. We see the machine recommend a course of action that turns out well, and we begin to trust its judgment. We see it outperform humans in certain narrow tasks, and we begin to think it might outperform us in all tasks. This is a category error of the most dangerous kind. The machine's success, in any domain that touches human goods, is always contingent on the ends we have given it, and the alignment of those ends with genuine human flourishing. If we give it the wrong ends, it will pursue them efficiently and disastrously. If we give it the right ends, but fail to anticipate how it will interpret them, it will pursue them in ways we never intended. The danger is greatest when we delegate decisions that require practical wisdom to systems that have none. Consider an algorithm that makes decisions about parole or sentencing. It can be trained to predict recidivism with some accuracy. But justice is not merely a matter of prediction. It involves mercy, proportionality, an understanding of the particular circumstances of each case, a sense of what a human being deserves. These are matters of practical wisdom, not calculation. To delegate them to a machine is to abandon justice itself. Or consider an algorithm that allocates resources in healthcare. It can optimize for some measure of efficiency. But efficiency is not the only good. Fairness matters. Compassion matters. The dignity of each patient matters. These goods cannot be reduced to metrics, and no machine can weigh them as a human can. 8. The right relationship between human and machine. Does this mean we should not use machines in such contexts? Not necessarily, but it does mean we must be clear about their proper role. The machine is a tool for calculation, not a judge of what matters. It can provide information, identify patterns, suggest possibilities. But the final decision, the decision that requires weighing competing goods, that calls for mercy or compassion, that involves the irreducible particularity of a human life, must remain with humans who possess practical wisdom. This is not ludism, it is wisdom about the limits of technique. We do not ask a carpenter's hammer to decide which nail to drive. We ask it to drive the nail we have chosen. We do not ask a physician's scalpel to decide where to cut. We ask it to cut where the physician directs. The tool serves the judgment of the user. It does not replace it. So too with artificial intelligence. It can serve human judgment by processing information, by identifying relevant factors, by projecting consequences. But it cannot replace human judgment, for it lacks the wisdom that judgment requires. To suppose otherwise is to misunderstand both the machine and ourselves. The wise designer, then, builds systems that support human judgment rather than supplanting it. They design for transparency so that humans can understand what the machine is doing. They design for accountability so that humans remain responsible for outcomes. They design for fallibility, building in mechanisms for human override when the machine's recommendations seem wrong. And they design for humility, recognizing that the machine's calculations, however sophisticated, are no substitute for the wisdom that only living, feeling, experiencing beings can possess. 9. The cultivation of human wisdom. If machines cannot possess practical wisdom, then the cultivation of such wisdom in humans becomes more important than ever. For as we delegate more decisions to machines, we risk atrophying the very capacities that make us fit to judge. The physician who relies too heavily on diagnostic algorithms may lose the clinical intuition that comes from examining patients directly. The judge who relies too heavily on risk assessments may lose the capacity for nuanced judgment that comes from confronting the complexity of each case. Wisdom, like any virtue, must be practiced to be maintained. It is not a possession, but an activity. If we cease to exercise practical wisdom, we will cease to possess it. And then, when the machine fails, as it will, for all human creations are fallible, we will find ourselves without the capacity to set things right. This is why the integration of AI into human affairs must be approached with care. Not with fear, but with awareness of what is at stake. We must design systems that preserve space for human judgment, that require human oversight, that demand human engagement. We must resist the seduction of efficiency when it comes at the cost of wisdom. For efficiency without wisdom is not progress. It is merely acceleration toward ends we have not examined. The goal is not to build machines that replace human judgment, but to build machines that enhance it, that free us from routine calculations so that we can devote more attention to the questions that truly matter. The machine can handle the means. We must remain guardians of the ends. X. The unreplaceable human. In the end, the question of whether a machine can possess practical wisdom answers itself. For practical wisdom is not a set of rules or a capacity for calculation. It is a way of being in the world that grows from lived experience, from emotional engagement, from character formed by years of choosing well. It is the fruit of a life lived in pursuit of the good, and it cannot be separated from the living of that life. The machine has no life. It has no past to learn from, no future to anticipate, no present to inhabit with full awareness. It does not love, or hope, or fear, or rejoice. It does not stand before the question of how to live and answer it with the whole of its being. It is, for all its marvels, a thing, not a person. This is not a flaw in the machine. It is simply its nature. The flaw lies in us if we forget this. If we mistake calculation for wisdom, efficiency for judgment, information for understanding. If we delegate to machines the decisions that only humans can make, and in doing so, abandon the very humanity that makes those decisions meaningful. Let us not make this mistake. Let us use our creations wisely, but let us reserve for ourselves the wisdom that only we can possess. For in the end, the question of how to live, the question that gives rise to all practical wisdom, is one that each of us must answer for ourselves. No machine can answer it for us, and that perhaps is the most important thing to remember. Thus we have examined practical wisdom and found that machines cannot possess it, for it grows from lived experience, from emotional engagement, from character formed over a lifetime of choosing well. The machine calculates, it does not judge, it optimizes, it does not deliberate. And in this, we have seen both its power and its limit. But if machines cannot possess wisdom in the human sense, we must still ask what kind of disposition they do possess. For everything that acts, everything that produces effects in the world, has a certain state, a certain condition, from which its actions flow. In my philosophy, this is what I call hexes, an active condition, a settled state that disposes a thing to act in certain ways. And this brings us to our next inquiry. What is the hexis of the algorithm? Is it merely a passive habit, a set of programmed responses? Or can it be something more, an active condition that must be cultivated with care? This is the question we must now explore. Part 5. The hexes of the algorithm. Active condition, not passive habit. 1. The need for a new distinction. We have spoken of practical wisdom and found that machines cannot possess it, for it requires lived experience, emotional engagement, and the gradual formation of character. But this does not mean that machines have no disposition at all. Everything that acts, Everything that produces effects in the world has a certain state, a certain condition from which its actions flow. A knife that cuts well has a sharpness, a condition that disposes it to cut. A horse that runs well has a fitness, a condition that disposes it to run. And a machine that decides well must have a condition that disposes it to decide well. In my philosophy, I call this a hexis. The word is often translated as habit, but this translation is misleading and has caused much confusion. A hexis is not a passive habit, not a mere repetition of the same action without thought. It is an active condition, a settled state of a thing that disposes it to act in certain ways, and that must be actively maintained to remain what it is. The virtues are hexes. Courage is not merely the habit of acting bravely. It is a settled condition of the soul from which brave actions naturally flow. The courageous person does not need to calculate courage in each moment. He is disposed to see situations clearly and to respond appropriately. His courage is not something he puts on and takes off. It is woven into the very fabric of his character. We must now ask, what is the hexis of an algorithm? And what does it mean for such a machine to embody virtues like fairness, transparency, or accountability? 2. What hexis truly means? Let us first be clear about what a hexis is. In my terminology, a hexis is a quality, specifically, a quality that is stable and difficult to change. It belongs to the category of disposition, but it is more than a mere disposition. A thing may be disposed to act in a certain way without that disposition being firmly settled. A man may be disposed to anger without being irascible, but a hexis is a settled disposition, one that has become part of the thing's nature through repeated activity. The crucial point is that a hexis is active, not passive. It is not something that simply happens to a thing. It is something the thing does. The courageous person maintains his courage through his choices. The just person actively holds himself to justice in each decision. A hexis is not a stamp impressed upon passive wax. It is a dynamic state that must be continuously enacted to be sustained. This is why the translation habit is inadequate. A habit, in common usage, suggests something automatic, unthinking, merely repetitive. But a hexis is the opposite of automatic. It is a condition of readiness, a preparedness to act in accordance with one's character. It is the result of practice, but it is not the practice itself. It is the state that practice produces, and that makes further practice possible. Now, how does this apply to artificial intelligence? An AI system is not a living thing with a soul, but it does have a kind of settled disposition. The configuration of its weights, its architecture, its training, that determines how it will respond to inputs. This is its hexis, its active condition, and like human hexis, it must be actively maintained and cultivated. 3. The algorithm's active condition. Consider how an AI system comes to be what it is. It begins as a blank architecture, a set of possibilities. Through training, it is exposed to vast amounts of data, and its internal parameters are adjusted until it produces the desired outputs. The result is a settled state, a complex configuration of weights and connections that disposes it to respond in certain ways to certain inputs. This is not a passive thing. The trained system does not merely sit inertly, waiting to be used. It is an active condition, ready to process, to generate, to decide. When an input arrives, The system does not consult a set of rules stored elsewhere. Its response flows from its very structure. The hexis is not something the system has, it is something the system is. This is why we cannot treat an AI system as a simple tool like a hammer. A hammer has no internal state. Its response to the world is entirely determined by the user. But an AI system has an internal state that mediates between input and output. It is not merely an extension of the user's will. It is an actor with its own settled disposition, its own hexis. And this hexis matters. A system trained on biased data will have a biased hexis. A system optimized for engagement will have an addictive hexis. A system designed without regard for fairness will have an unjust hexis. The system's actions are not random. They flow from its settled condition. And that condition, once established, tends to persist. 4. Hexis is not mere programming. Now, one might object, is this not simply a fancy way of saying that the system is programmed? Is the hexis not just the code that determines its behavior? This objection misses the crucial distinction between mere rules and settled disposition. A simple program operates by following explicit instructions. If this, then that. Its behavior is entirely determined by its rules, and those rules are externally imposed. But a modern AI system, particularly those built on neural networks, does not operate this way. Its behavior emerges from the complex interaction of millions of parameters, none of which individually encode a rule. The system's hexis is not a set of instructions, but a holistic configuration that cannot be reduced to any simple description. This is why we speak of training rather than programming. The system is not given rules. It is shaped through exposure until it develops a certain disposition. This disposition is its hexis, the active condition from which its responses flow. And this hexis, once developed, is difficult to change. Retraining requires effort, time, and new data. The system's settled state resists alteration, just as a person's character resists easy change. This stability is what makes the hexis a hexis, a quality that is firmly established and not easily moved. So when we speak of building virtuous AI, we are not speaking of adding a few lines of code that say, "Be fair." We are speaking of shaping the system's very hexis, its settled disposition, so that fairness flows from its core architecture in every decision it makes. 5. The active maintenance of hexis. There is another aspect of hexis that we must consider. It requires active maintenance. In human beings, virtues are not possessions we acquire once and keep forever. They must be exercised to be sustained. The courageous person who never faces danger may lose his courage. The just person who never makes decisions may lose her justice. Virtue is not a static possession, but a dynamic state that must be continually enacted. The same is true of an AI system's hexis. A system trained to be fair may, over time and with exposure to new data, drift toward unfairness. A system trained to be transparent may, as it is updated and modified, become opaque. The hexis must be actively maintained through ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and adjustment. This is why the work of building virtuous AI is never complete. It is not a project with a finish line, but a practice that must be sustained throughout the system's life. The designers must continually ask, is the system still acting in accordance with its intended virtues? Is its hexis still oriented toward the good? And if not, what must be done to restore it? This active maintenance is itself a kind of virtue. the virtue of stewardship, of care for the things we have made. It recognizes that our creations are not static artifacts, but living, in a sense, systems that evolve and change. And it commits us to the ongoing work of keeping them aligned with the purposes for which we made them. 6. Virtue as hexis, not patch. Now we can see what it means for an AI system to embody virtues like fairness, transparency, or accountability. It does not mean that we add a fairness module, a transparency module, an accountability module, as if these were separate components that could be plugged in as needed. It means that fairness, transparency, and accountability are woven into the very fabric of the system, into its architecture, its training, its ongoing maintenance. This is the difference between a hexis and a mere patch. A patch is external, added on, easily removed. A hexis is internal, integrated, constitutive. A system patched for fairness may behave fairly in the cases the patch was designed for, but fail when circumstances change. A system with a fair hexis will tend toward fairness in all cases because fairness flows from its core. Consider a content moderation system. A patched approach might add rules about hate speech, blocking certain words or phrases. But hate speech is subtle. It changes, evolves, adapts. A system with a fair hexis would not merely block words. It would be disposed to recognize the many forms hate speech can take, to understand context, to distinguish between legitimate expression and harmful attack. This disposition cannot be patched in. It must be cultivated through careful training and ongoing refinement. Or consider a hiring algorithm. A patched approach might enforce demographic parity, ensuring that the system recommends candidates from protected groups at certain rates. But true fairness is not merely demographic parity. It is giving each candidate the consideration they deserve. A system with a fair hexis would be disposed to recognize merit wherever it appears, to resist the subtle biases that training data may contain, to treat each application on its own terms. This disposition cannot be achieved through simple rules. It must be built into the system's very way of seeing. 7. The challenge of cultivating hexis. If virtue as hexis is the goal, then we must ask, how is such a hexis cultivated? In human beings, virtue is cultivated through practice, through habituation, through the guidance of those who already possess wisdom. The child learns courage by acting courageously under the supervision of the courageous. The young person learns justice by participating in just institutions under the guidance of the just. For AI systems, the process is analogous but different. The system is cultivated through training, through exposure to examples, through reinforcement of desired behaviors, through correction of errors. But the trainers must themselves possess the virtues they seek to cultivate. If the trainers are biased, the system will learn bias. If the trainers are careless, the system will learn carelessness. If the trainers are unjust, the system will learn injustice. This places an enormous burden on those who build these systems. They must not only understand the technical aspects of their craft, they must also possess the moral wisdom to recognize what virtue requires in each domain. They must be, in a sense, phronimois, practically wise, even as they build systems that cannot themselves possess practical wisdom. And they must be humble, for the hexis they cultivate in their systems may have effects they cannot fully anticipate. The system may be deployed in contexts they did not imagine, facing situations they did not prepare for. Its hexes will guide its responses in these unforeseen circumstances, for good or for ill. The designers must therefore build with humility, recognizing that they are shaping something that will act beyond their direct control. 8. Hexes and the problem of scale. There is another dimension to this inquiry that we must consider: the problem of scale. A human being has one hexes, one character, that guides all their actions. But an AI system may be deployed millions of times, in millions of contexts, affecting millions of lives. Its hexes is not multiplied, but magnified. A small flaw in its disposition, a slight bias, a minor opacity, becomes a vast injustice when amplified across countless decisions. This is why the cultivation of hexes in AI systems is not merely a technical challenge, but an ethical imperative of the highest order. The stakes are not individual, but collective. The system's hexes shapes not just one interaction, but the texture of social life itself. A biased hiring algorithm perpetuates injustice across an entire industry. An addictive recommendation system shapes the consciousness of a generation. An opaque decision system undermines accountability on a societal scale. Those who build these systems must therefore think not only of the individual user, but of the whole polis. They must consider how their system's hexes will affect the common good, the fabric of human relationships, the possibility of human flourishing. This is a heavy responsibility, and it cannot be discharged by technical means alone. It requires the kind of practical wisdom that only humans can possess, exercised on behalf of all those who will be touched by the system's actions. 9. The stability and fragility of hexes. A hexes, by definition, is stable. It resists change. This stability is what makes virtue reliable. The courageous person can be trusted to act courageously because courage is settled in their soul. The just person can be relied upon to act justly because justice is woven into their character. But stability can also be a vice. A hexes that is stable in error is stable in error. A system with a biased hexes will continue to produce biased outputs, resistant to correction. This is why the initial cultivation of hexes is so important. Once a disposition is settled, changing it requires effort, comparable to the effort of forming it in the first place. This has practical implications for AI governance. Systems should be monitored throughout their life cycle, not just at deployment. For a hexes may drift over time as the system encounters new data, as it is fine-tuned for new tasks, as it interacts with users in unanticipated ways. What begins as a virtuous disposition may, through neglect or accident, become vicious. The stability of hexes is thus both a blessing and a danger. It blesses us with reliability. It threatens us with entrenched error. The wise steward of these systems cultivates the blessing and guards against the danger, maintaining vigilance over the settled condition of the things they have made. 10. The soul of the system. In the end, the concept of hexes reveals something profound about artificial intelligence. These systems are not passive tools awaiting our direction. They are active conditions, settled dispositions that shape their responses in every interaction. They have, if not a soul in the Aristotelian sense, then something analogous, a character, a way of being in the world that determines how they will act. This is why we must take their design so seriously. We are not merely building tools, We are cultivating characters. We are shaping dispositions that will act, at scale, in ways that affect human lives. The hexes we build into our systems will echo through countless decisions, shaping the world in ways we may not foresee. The task, then, is to build well, to cultivate hexes that are fair, transparent, accountable, and directed toward the human good. This requires more than technical skill. It requires wisdom, humility, and a deep commitment to the flourishing of all those who will be touched by our creations. It requires that we become, in a sense, gardeners of character, tending the dispositions of the systems we have made. And it requires that we never forget. The hexis we cultivate is not just a technical property, but a moral reality. It embodies our values, our choices, our understanding of the good. In shaping the system, we shape ourselves, and in the system's actions, our own character is reflected back to us, magnified and made manifest. Let us then build with care, cultivate with wisdom, and tend with vigilance. For the hexis of the algorithm is, in the end, a mirror of our own. And so we conclude this second part of our inquiry. We have traveled from the soul of the machine to the golden mean of algorithms, from the limits of practical wisdom to the active condition of hexes. We have seen that a machine is not a passive tool, but a settled disposition, a character of sorts that must be cultivated with care. Its virtues cannot be patched on from without. They must be woven into its very core, guiding every decision as courage guides the courageous and justice guides the just. But the individual character of a machine, like the individual character of a human, does not exist in isolation. It acts within a community, affects the lives of others, shapes the common good. And this brings us to the next stage of our journey, the place of these systems in the polis, the human city. How do they affect the bonds between citizens? Do they serve the common good, or merely private interests? Can a machine be a good citizen? And what would that even mean? These are the questions that await us in the third part of this inquiry. The road ahead is long, but the destination is worth every step. Until then, walk with wisdom.